Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich talks with community leaders about issues in the public safety arena, sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.
And this is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich, and this is the Sheriff's Report. You know, 2 weeks ago we started talking about what you see in the media and what is kind of behind the scenes that you're not being told. So this is going to be part 3 of that segment. And last week we ended with a discussion about an organization called SCAR, one of its members, Anwar Peace, some of the things that they say. And the harsh reality is our media never challenges these people. They never challenge the narrative. And it's really amazing thing to watch, because if law enforcement were to make these outrageous claims, the media would be immediately checking that. You know, the fact checkers would be out in force. But organizations like SCAR get to put out false information on a continual basis, and they're actually even being called on the carpet by other activist groups because of the information that they put out. But the media, no, they really don't challenge that narrative. So let's dive into the next slide. And as mentioned before, we started talking about a CREM article that was ran 2 weeks ago, and we have a few questions about that. And these are the questions that, you know, CREM should have asked. These are the questions that CREM should have dove into. These are the questions that CREM should have fact-checked. And quite frankly, these are the questions that they should have come back and asked Chief Meidel of the Spokane Police Department. They could even ask me any of these questions, but they just went ahead with SCAR and Anwar Peace's take on the matter, using a organization called Mapping Police Violence. And that should be a clue for you right there, folks. Mapping police violence. Your law enforcement officers aren't out there committing violence. We're responding to the violence. We're the ones that have to go and deal with the violence. And quite frankly, sadly, here in Spokane, since last September, because we have this gang war that's going on, we've watched 6 kids get put in body bags. That's what your law enforcement gets to do. That's what we get to do. We're the ones that go and pick up the pieces when this violence happens. So this mapping police violence, that should be the largest clue there is. But during this segment, we're going to talk about some of the sources our media likes to use to prove their point. So if we can, you know, take a look at these numbers, you know, how is it that one officer-involved shooting in a 7-year period, how did that become 195 in that same 7-year period? Because that's what mapping police violence would have you believe. They would have you believe that SPD being involved in one officer-involved shooting of an African American somehow puts them at number 3 in the nation as far as officer-involved shootings. And 3 times the number of African Americans are shot versus white citizens of our community. How can that be when one in a 7-year period, how does one become 3 times the number of 12? How? Well, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about proportionality math. It's a unique math scheme, but it's a lie. It makes you believe something that truly isn't happening. And, you know, CREM did try to throw a little disclaimer in there, as you see on the bottom. Well, we have to contextualize. No, you have to fact check, folks. And you, the consumer. See, this is our fault, folks. Our media gets away with this because we don't force them to tell us the truth. Our media gets away with this because we keep buying their product. We keep doing this to ourselves. There's nobody else to blame. They speak very, very differently when you challenge them. And you want to know why you have so many businesses stepping into political fray and everything else? It's because of the pressure they're being put on them by activist groups that are actually contacting them and threatening their bottom line if they don't step up and toe the narrative of the activist. That is truly happening. Next slide. So, in our last segment, this was the slide we kind of ended up with. You know, how many officer-involved shootings involving the black community has the Sheriff's Office been involved in that same 7-year period? Well, we went back and looked at this because this is old data that SCAR and CRIM brought back to life this year. This actually came out last year. I had to deal with it last year, so here we are dealing with it again. And we went back and looked at our officer-involved shootings. And we have fairly good records up till about 1987. Anything prior to that, the record systems have been merged so many times we can't tell what's reliable. So we stopped in 1987, and there have been no officer-involved shootings since 1987 that we can verify involving an African American in this community as far as the Spokane County Sheriff's Office. Next slide. And these are the numbers. From 1987 to April of 2021, these are the number of officer-involved shootings that the Spokane County Sheriff's Office has been involved in. A total of 45, 20 of which were fatal, 16 people were injured, and 9 were not injured. The racial breakdown of the suspects, because that's what we deal with. We're not out shooting citizens. We're not just out there, as the media and the activists would have you believe, you know, responding in such a manner that we just automatically go out and shoot people, because that's the narrative they want you to believe. The breakdown as far as demographically, male-female, 38 white male subjects were involved in those shootings, 17 fatal, 12 injured, 8 not injured, 4 white female suspects, 1 fatal, 2 injured, 1 not injured, 2 American Indian, Alaska Native male subjects, 1 fatal, 1 injured, and 1 Pacific Island male suspect, 1 fatal. No African Americans. That's the dynamic. Now, when we talk about proportionality, we talk about disparity. Nobody talks about this disparity, because if you're a white male in this community, you are the ones most likely to be involved in officer-involved shooting with the police. That is the fact. Now, folks, it's like I said, our intent is not to go out and shoot people. Matter of fact, our intent is not to have to take that action. We respond, though, to your actions. Your actions dictate how things go. That is just the true fact of the matter. If you're told to put down a gun, the wisest thing to do would be put down the gun. It seems fairly simple, because if you keep that gun in your hand, you are now forcing me to read your mind. You're forcing me to, are you going to hurt somebody with that weapon? Are you going to hurt me with that weapon? Are you going to continue your crime spree with that weapon? Gun, knife, it doesn't matter. If you simply do one simple thing, if you're asked to put down a weapon, put the weapon down. And everything goes very well after. If you come at the officer, you come at the deputy with that weapon, odds are you probably are going to get shot. And I can't make it any more clear for you. The problem is we have become a society of I don't have to. I don't have to do what I'm asked to do. I don't have, just ask any teacher. Ask what their classrooms have become. Ask any school principal what their buildings have become like. Because we have truly fostered an attitude of, I don't have to do what I'm told. And quite frankly, America is reaping that reward right now. And it's really a sad thing to watch. Next slide. You know, I hear activists all the time, and this quote has been given to me multiple times. Sheriff, we just speak truth to power. No, you don't. The day you start speaking truth, I will actually maybe fall out of my chair. You speak your truth, but you do not speak the truth. And I will tell you that there can be no trust or healing until activist groups and activists like SCAR and Anwar Peace speak the truth and not political rhetoric. And you can quote me on that. Because that is the fact. And we all should be asking our media sources, why didn't you, in this case, CREM, contact the sheriff's office concerning Mr. Peace's rhetoric? He said a lot. We covered it in the part 2 of this. We covered what he had to say about the sheriff's office. You never once reached out and asked for any clarification on that. And maybe even better, maybe we should find out and ask the question of why Mr. Peace was arrested a couple of weeks ago. What's his background? I asked a reporter that one day because they had covered an event out at our training center. Mr. Peace was there. And I asked the young reporter who was covering that, who are these people? Have you really looked into who these people are? What their backgrounds are? And the question was answered, well, not really. They told me a little. No, actually look into who they are. You do that with us. You should really take a deep dive into some of the people you are taking their word on things that should be driving our community's future. You should fact check all of us. Next slide. So, the reason that the media doesn't ask these questions is the media has its own agenda. That simple. And that agenda does not include facts, truth, or logic. This is the closest America has come to being a state-run media. We are that close, folks. We have come to the point where our media, our news, the place we go to make our decisions or gather information to make our decisions are controlled by about 6 corporations. And sadly, most of those corporations have adopted one bent, one slant. Our news, and I put that in quotes because it's really not news, is more propaganda and entertainment than journalism. I told a young reporter during an interview that I had with KXLY that, journalism's dead. 24-hour news cycle killed journalism. And he disputed that. I went, look, I'm telling you, your peers, your older peers have been telling me that journalism has been dead since about 2008. I used to help one of Gonzaga's teachers with his class on journalism. I'd come in, the class would ask me questions, they'd interview me, I'd do those type of things, and that professor would be the one to make the statement that journalism has truly died. Truly died. And we're taking and trying to get our facts from people don't really go after facts anymore. They go after sound bites. Clickbait. Clickbait has become the nature of the day. Clickbait is that salacious headline or the first few sentences in a paragraph. That's the clickbait, that's the hook. The sad part is, we as Americans, we don't read. We don't read the entire story. We look at the clickbait, we might get the first paragraph, and I'll tell you that the first paragraph is just the hook, and it's just going to keep diving into that narrative. And if you do read it, you may find the truth or a semblance of the truth somewhere at the bottom of that story. But we don't read. Can we go back to that slide? And the sad part about our media is they truly believe that their own propaganda and that of the extremist groups. They truly have bought in. Next slide. So a few weeks back, I did an interview about recruitment efforts for the Spokane County Sheriff's Office. We're putting up billboards in Portland, Seattle, Denver area. We're going to be moving on to New York, Southern California, Texas area. We're targeting communities that have shown that they don't value their law enforcement. And we want good police officers, and we want to give them a place to come to work, and this community does value their police officers. So during that interview, this young reporter asked me the question of, well, do you think it's because, no, you're not getting any recruits because law enforcement is looked so down upon? I went, no, you've got that exactly wrong, especially in this community where the polling shows that 85% of this community supports their law enforcement. You got that wrong. I says, even take a look at it on the national level. Roughly 16% of the nation went, okay, yeah, defund the police. The rest of the nation went, no, that's a bad idea. And there's a link to the story. Now, this young reporter really took offense to that, and he's the one that I had the conversation about journalism with and everything else. And he couldn't believe that people actually like the police. Could not get that, could not understand, because that's not the narrative that the national media, and quite frankly KXLY, has been putting out for years. He couldn't get that. I mean, you could see it in his face that he took great exception to that statement. So what does the young reporter do? Well, in order to counter that statement that I made going, no, people like their law enforcement, you guys kind of have this a little bit wrong, he went and found a source. So let's go to the next slide. And he went to Data for Progress. And what does Data for Progress show? I want you to pay attention to some key words here, and we'll come back to why I'm asking you to do that. Remember my statement. People like law enforcement. Matter of fact, defund, could only get about 16% support. What does he go? He finds a database, Data for Progress, and they say that 65% of likely voters support reallocating some law enforcement budgets to support non-police first responder programs. Now, catch that last sentence, because it's going to become important for you. Next slide. So, this type of reporting from KXLY did not surprise me, not at all. They are slanted. Their reporting concerning these types of issues is very slanted. All you have to do is follow the executive news director, Melissa Luck's Twitter feed, and you'll quickly find just how slanted she is. Last year around this time actually, we came out with and released statistics showing that our crime rate, because COVID and the release of inmates from our jail due to COVID had gone up triple digits. Triple digits. She took exception to that, and she came out on Twitter and challenged our numbers. Didn't call us, she came out on Twitter. I've never seen a news director ever do anything like that. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And go back last year when we had the civil unrest. Our entire media corps challenged us when we said, especially me, when I said, you know, that riot we had, that was not our African American community, that was Antifa and socialist influence. They took great exception to that. To the point that Antifa doesn't really exist, it's just an ideology. I can tell you Antifa exists. I have pictures of them. Matter of fact, in our investigations, we kind of have found out some interesting facts about Antifa in the Spokane area. We have some very firm connections to Rose City Antifa. Where's Rose City Antifa? Portland. But these are the things that our media has done. Next slide. So, who is Data for Progress? Well, it's a 501c3, and it is a project by the Tides Advocacy Group. And the Tides folks are a team of political and legal and financial experts that fuel movements for social justice and the health of our democracy. They are a progressive think tank. Progressive. And through polling and policy development, they spread their progressive ideas. Let's go to the next slide. So, they state that they define policies that win. They have advised progressive presidential candidates, I wonder who that might be, senators, members of Congress on policy and polling. Analysis of is, they say journalists rely on them for data, and apparently they do. They list the New York Times, Washington Post, hundreds of others. Next slide. And here's what they do, folks, because you can actually do this. You can spread your propaganda through polling. And it's really how you ask the question. So, this is the question they asked. They found that 68% of the voters support Biden's plan for the Green New Deal because it will create new, good-paying union jobs. Now, who would be opposed to that? Who would be opposed to a question of, hey, would you support a plan that would create millions of jobs? No, no one's going to be against that. But let's throw in the other side. What about the millions more jobs you're going to lose because of this effort? I wonder what the answer would be then, because this is not a net gain proposition. This is to kill one side of industry to build another side of industry. And the actual facts of the matter, it appears, it will be a net loss of jobs, a net loss of those union jobs. Next slide. So Data for Progress also states that, you know, Democrats are discussing and embracing a host of big ticket progressive agenda items. You're getting the gist of it, but I want you to go to the last sentence. However, as activist organizing continues to push these ideas onto the agenda, centrists within the party, meaning the Democratic Party, and the rest of the party are expressing concerns about its political viability. And that is a true statement. During last year, I talked to many Democrats who walked away from the Democratic Party. Now, I'm not trying to be political here, folks. I'm just giving you the facts. Because here's a secret. There are many people walking away from the Republican Party, too. you all know that I'm pretty much equal opportunity on this one. They're both draining their membership rolls because of the extremism that controls the parties. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of that same poll. Next one. Some of the ideas that they're pushing, stating that the Supreme Court expansion starts with great approval. How many of you think that it's a good idea to stack the Supreme Court? Just a thought. Next slide. So the question is, Sheriff, you're telling us that KXLY went to a progressive polling site to counter my statement? Yeah, that's what they did. Next slide. But let's go to USA Today. Hardly a bastion of conservatism. See, folks, I don't go to extremes to find my information. It's dangerous. This is what they actually said. USA Today. 1 in 5, 18%, support defunding. Only 28% of African Americans support it, and only 34% of the Democratic Party supports it. Slightly different than what the Tides group wants you to believe. Next slide. So, it's all how you ask the question. My statement was, 16% of this country supports defunding. Data for polling, reallocation. Well, the problem is if you use reallocation, people go, yeah, maybe we should take a little bit of money and use it for mental health. Take a little money and use it for drug and alcohol, recovery efforts and things like that. Who would be against that? Very few people. Even I'm not against that. However, even I'm not opposed to spending money on mental health and things like that, but how many of you would support that, knowing that in order to do that, you'd have to lose police officers, deputies on the street? Because guess what? When they gave us those tasks to do, they didn't fund us to do it. We just had to start doing it. There was no funding for it. So if you told me that you were going to take part of my budget to do this, we would lose deputies, and we're already down deputies. We never recovered from the Great Recession. So think about what you're actually being asked and how these polls work, because this is propaganda being spread. Next slide. So, even redirecting, USA Today says 50% of the nation says no, bad idea. Even just reallocation, totally different than the source used by KXLY. Next slide. The trust for Black Lives Matter has dropped to 50%, and the trust in local police officers has risen to 69%. Next slide. And there's a graphic. The United States military and local law enforcement outstrip President Biden, unions, and Black Lives Matter as far as who you trust. Next slide. Folks, we're going to drop it here. For part 4, we will talk about the social justice theme that is being pushed by Data for Progress type groups, SCAR, Smart Justice, Spokane. Those are the things we'll talk about in part 4. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich. Have a great day.
Here at River Ridge Hardware Garden Center, where we have all the plants and flowers that will spruce up your yard, from the lilacs for Spokane's Lilac City, to awesome hanging baskets and pots that you can actually put the hanging baskets in. Here at River Ridge Hardware, we want to help you set up your landscape needs. Neighbors helping neighbors at River Ridge Hardware.
Out with the old and in with the new. And at Wendell Nissan, we want your trade. Whether it's sports, camping, or dump runs, we have the vehicle for you. Here's our great sales team with this month's exciting offers.
Hi, I'm Robert. Load up the family and the gear in this Nissan Frontier or the all-new Rogue. They have everything you need to enjoy all the Northwest has to offer. Out with the old
and in with the new. Come see us at Wendell Nissan at the Y or wendellnissan.com.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.